Good morning, everyone. It's a wonderful day here in London. First day, I think first day of autumn was yesterday or the day before. Absolutely lovely here, but it's great to see you all today. Thank you for joining the call. Before we begin, there are just a few housekeeping points. When joining the internet link, you'll have been given the option of joining through your computer's audio or dialing in via telephone. If you have difficulty connecting to the audio, please message the Centre for Science and Security Studies, or HOST, using the chat box. On a PC or laptop, the chat box is to the right-hand side. If you're using a phone or tablet, you will have to toggle this to view. To manage the session, this is all one-way audio. All participants are currently muted, so if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A box. If you're using a PC or laptop, again, the Q&A button is at the bottom of the screen. But if you're using a smartphone or tablet, you'll have to toggle this to view. So please have a quick look now. Please also use the opportunity to ensure that the video slides are visible and minimize any features such as videos which you will find distracting. The presentation will also use Mentimeter polls. All of these polls are anonymous, so please don't worry about that when voting. And if you'd like, I'm just putting the Mentimeter link in the chat box now. This will be repeated during the webinar itself, but if you have the opportunity, please follow the link in the chat box as well. This will just simplify things later. Today's session is called Developing a Robust and Resilient Security and Safety Culture. It is one of the two webinars presented by Wendy Anyster, a consulting occupational therapist. And these will look at human performance dynamics in the workplace overall. The webinar is planned to last for 45 minutes with questions and answers at the end. The session is being recorded and will be available for viewing after the session. At the end of the session, there will also be a short questionnaire for your feedback. Now, without any further delay, Wendy, I'm pleased to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Carl. Okay, all right. Can everybody see me now? Okay, thank you. The spotlight is on me. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on which country you are and which time zone that you are in. It would be great just to hear where everybody is from. So if you could type good morning or good afternoon in your language, that will be great. I'm from South Africa originally, and in South Africa there are 11 different official languages. So Molo, Mulweni, Sawubona, hello, goeiemorgen. Welcome to the session. I'm going to be talking about developing a robust and resilient safety and security culture. In other words, a strong safety and security culture that is sustainable, even in challenging contexts, and especially when an organization experiences diversity. So on to the next slide, please, Carl. I had to show you this picture. It's a picture of Koeberg Nuclear Power Station. I started my career at Koeberg Nuclear Power Station about 27 years ago. Since moving to the UK 12 years ago, I've had the opportunity of working with diverse nuclear operators and also international safety organizations like WANO and the IEA. I would describe myself as a passionate nuclear professional, and in some small way trying to add value to the nuclear industry. Now, Koeberg, in addition to employing a station psychologist, also employed a number of occupational and clinical psychologists. The reason why Koeberg decided to do that is because they wanted to introduce more rigor, and they wanted to ensure that the organizational development and human performance improvement strategies were grounded in behavioral science. So we wanted to ensure that we had a robust and evidence-based approach to bringing about improvements in human performance and organizational culture. So that's just a little bit about my background. Before I continue, I would love to know where you are from, and what your role is, perhaps in the organization. So just a quick poll to establish whether you are an operator, a regulator, academic, or anything else. So if you can just access the poll via the link that Carl kindly posted for us, that will be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. I think we're closed, although we do have one raised hand. So Wendy, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That just gives me an indication of your profile in the audience, so that hopefully I can make it even more relevant for you. Thank you to those who said hello in the chat. I see we have some participants from Ghana, from Manchester, Oxfordshire, Cumbria, Scotland. So a warm welcome to everybody. Thank you, Carl. We can move on to the next slide. Okay, so the discussion areas that I would like to focus on today is I'd like to talk to you about the importance of culture in enabling safe, secure, and effective performance. I'd like us to explore the behaviors in an organization with a strong safety and security culture. We'll also look at what are the key factors that impact how people engage and operate in the work environment. And how can we create a work environment and a culture that is robust and resilient, and especially one in which there is a high level of trust, open communication, and accountability. So those are the focus areas for today's discussion. As Carl mentioned, there will be a part 2. So there are some aspects that we may go into a little bit more in detail in part 2 of this particular topic. Thank you, Carl. So there are many powerful statements that talk about safety and security culture. I'm highlighting 2 of those, and I'd like to read it to you, and I'd like you to reflect on what it's saying. An effective nuclear security culture depends on proper planning, training, awareness, operations and maintenance, as well as the thoughts and actions of people who plan, operate, and maintain nuclear security systems. An organization may be technically competent while remaining vulnerable if it discounts the role of the human factor. Thus, the human factor, including the upper tier of managers and leaders, is important to effective nuclear security and safety, I would say. So that particular definition highlights that effectiveness is influenced not only by actions, but the thoughts of people who plan, operate, and maintain nuclear security systems. And it highlights the importance of the human factor. If we reflect on operational experience, lessons learned, if we look at significant operating experience reports, we will see how the human factor has become even more prevalent in contributing to some of the events and the incidents that we've witnessed in the industry. The next definition is also a powerful one, and I think this creates a very strong business case for the topic of this webinar today. Good security is 20% equipment and 80% culture. I repeat, good security is 20% equipment and 80% culture. Before we look at factors that influence organizational culture and how we can bring about positive behavioral shifts, I first want us to define what we mean by organizational culture. So again, we've created another poll, and these polls are designed for you to interact and participate in a safe way. I know it's not always easy when there's a big audience to participate by commenting in the chat box or commenting verbally and asking a question. As Carl highlighted, these polls or questionnaires are anonymous, and it's designed to tap into your thinking. So the question is, what does organizational culture mean to you? Again, if you can access the link, make sure that you use the code. I would really appreciate hearing your unique thoughts about what organizational culture means. Thank you. There are still some thoughts and contributions. Thank you so much for letting us hear your perspective. Okay. So the words that are popping out here is about culture means values, attitude, expectations. It's about a team approach. It's about walking the talk. It's about behaviors, not just employee behaviors. I see management behaviors as well. When we talk about organizational culture, for some people, they think about responsibility. They think about efficiency. They think about engagement. They think about morale. And they think about safety. So some of your thoughts are highlighting the impact of organizational culture. So culture influences safety, definitely. And that's why we're talking about it. And in the nuclear industry, certainly when we think about organizational culture, we think about safety. Okay, so I'm going to try and remember that when I put up my next slide, just to give you a pictorial version of what we mean by organizational culture, and then I'll link it to some of your descriptive words. Okay. So you'll see that this is a picture of the behavioral iceberg. Now, for those of you who know a little or maybe a lot about icebergs, we use this analogy because so basically with an iceberg, 10%, the tip of the iceberg is only 10%, and that's the visible and observable part above the surface of the water. The critical mass of the iceberg lies beneath the surface. It's invisible. You can't see it above the surface of the water. So behavior, what we hear people saying, what we see people doing, that's the visible and observable part of organizational culture. However, there are other factors that influence behavior and also form part of organizational culture. And those factors are less visible and they're less observable. And some of you had those descriptors up there. I definitely saw attitude and I saw values as well. So attitude, somebody could have a positive or negative attitude towards safety and security. You may not easily see that in body language, and you may not hear that in what the person may be saying in group meetings. Our feelings impact our behavior, what we say and do. Emotions like anger, frustration, emotions like fear of being seen as incompetent, fear of being embarrassed, fear of being judged, that may stop or prevent us from voicing our concerns about potential safety or security threats. Our values, in other words, what's important to us, that influences our day-to-day behavior. It influences our choices, it influences our decisions, and it influences our action. In an organizational context, it influences where we direct our time, our energy, and our attention. In an organization with a robust and resilient safety culture, people will value accountability. They will value taking ownership for their role and contribution. At the bottom of this iceberg are beliefs. And those beliefs are assumptions that we make. In other words, our thoughts. And beliefs and assumptions are the hardest to shift. However, if we want to bring about a sustainable shift in organizational culture, we have to address culture from a very holistic perspective and shift how people may be thinking about safety and security, how they think about their role and contribution. So yes, the other words that you mentioned is all relevant. Organizational culture has an impact on the level of employee engagement. Organizational culture is definitely a predictor of operational excellence and safety and security in our organizational context. So before we move on from this, I think just in summation, culture is more than just behavior. Culture is what we say and do and think and feel. So there are a number of factors that will influence this type of culture, and we will explore particularly two of those factors that will influence what people say, what they think, what they feel, and what they do. Thank you, Carl. So I'd like us to make culture even more tangible. So let's explore what are the behaviors that we will see in an organization with a strong safety and security culture. So a reminder is a behavior is visible, it's observable. You can hear me asking a question and you can see me waving my hand. Again, there's a Mentimeter poll for you just to capture your thoughts around the behaviors that we will see. Robust, forward-thinking, proactive, shared ownership, challenging culture. So we may see people or hear people asking challenging questions. We may see a questioning attitude being demonstrated in their behavior when they ask their colleagues and their managers questions to help them to clarify the safety and security aspects. Energy, absolutely. That's one of the facets associated with engagement. Confident, awareness, rules being followed, transparency, honesty, well-informed. Executive-led. So in an organization with a robust and resilient organizational culture, we will see managers modeling the behavior that we want others to demonstrate. We will hear people asking lots of questions. Some of those questions may be challenging questions. Somebody has also highlighted that we'll see teamwork. Absolutely, we will see people working collaboratively within their teams and across organizational boundaries. Innovation, yes. We will hear people offering suggestions and ideas on how to improve safety culture and security culture. And they will be discussing these ideas with their colleagues. Okay, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Okay, Carl, can we move back to the slide with the pictures? Okay, thank you. So I think there's a good understanding in participants around the behaviors that we would typically see. So we'll hear people asking questions, we'll hear people offering their ideas, we will hear people talking about their safety and security concerns, even to somebody in a higher position than them. So how do we encourage that type of behavior? And I'd like to focus on two factors that are essential to establishing a robust and resilient culture: engaged employees and effective leadership. So what do we mean by engagement? Now, engagement is getting up in the morning and saying, yay, it's another work day. I'm so excited to go to work, to interact with my colleagues, to do my job. I'm looking forward to this experience. So that's the very layman's definition of engagement. If we look at the literature, this is one of the definitions of engagement. On the next slide. Okay. On the next slide, please, Paul. Thank you. So engagement is defined as the extent to which an employee feels passionate about the job and committed to the organization and the level of willingness to put in discretionary effort. So engagement is more than just satisfaction. A satisfied employee may be content with their work, but they may very well continue with the status quo. An engaged employee is somebody who has an emotional commitment to the organization and to the organization's goals, and they go the extra mile. In a safety and security context, what that means is they do more than just comply with security and safety rules and procedures. They go the extra mile by offering ideas and suggestions to improve the safety culture. Thank you, Carl. On to the next slide. So there's a lot of research and evidence to support the correlation also between engagement and safety as well. So we know that research demonstrates that engaged employees will have higher levels of attention to risk, and they'll also generate more creative ideas. This information is in the slide pack, so you can read the further detail. Okay, thank you, Carl. Right, so this is just a picture to illustrate that when somebody is engaged, there's a level of energy that some of you described, and you want to be involved, you want to participate. Disengagement, think of that as somebody moving away. And as I mentioned, in our context, it can be the difference between just complying with a safety and security rule and procedure to actually being emotionally committed to bringing about performance improvements. At part 2 of this webinar, we will explore from a neuroscience perspective and a psychological perspective all those human factors and social drivers that may impact how people engage. Thank you, Carl. Okay. So if you're thinking of a practical question now, how do I facilitate stronger employee engagement? Here are some of the very important factors that you can focus on. The first factor is a strategic perspective. So if people understand where the organization is coming from, where it's at, where it wants to get to, they understand the what and the why, they are more likely to be emotionally committed and engaged to the organization's goals. The organizational culture, as we said, impacts engagement. Employees' needs being met also impacts engagement. And the acronym SCARF stands for status, in other words, significance, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. That also impacts engagement. We'll explore that in detail in part 2. The quality and the effectiveness of communication influences the extent to which employees will engage in the organization. And the quality and the effectiveness of leadership, and particularly collaborative and inclusive leadership style, has a strong positive impact on engagement. The one factor that I'd like us now just to go into a little bit more detail about is employee voice. When employees feel that they have a voice in the organization, that will have a strong impact on how they engage and operate in the work environment. The important part that we're going to focus on now is psychological safety, because psychological safety impacts whether or not people will voice what they are really thinking and feeling. It will impact whether or not they will voice their ideas and questions. It will impact whether or not they will voice their question. It will impact whether or not they will challenge a work order or a task that they have to perform that they have concerns about when it comes to the safety and security risks. On to the next slide, Paul. Okay. So how can we create that environment where people will be willing to openly voice their questions, their thoughts, and their concerns? Thanks, Carl. So I'd like us just to define psychological safety. Psychological safety is the extent to which employees feel that they can take the interpersonal risk and express themselves in the workplace without fear of repercussions. In other words, without fear of negative consequences. It's a shared belief held by members of the team that others on the team will not embarrass you, reject you, or punish you for speaking up. It is the belief that the work environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, feeling able to speak up with relevant ideas, questions, or concerns. I wonder how psychologically safe you feel. I wonder when you go into a meeting and you've got a question to ask, if you feel safe enough to ask that question, or you may hold back because you think maybe this is something that you should know and you may be seen as incompetent by your team. So let's just complete this self-reflection set of questions. By completing these questions, it will also give you more insight into the behaviors associated with psychological safety. I'd really appreciate it if you can all complete this questionnaire. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for completing that questionnaire. It's really interesting to see the results. Now, when I first came across the concept or the term psychological safety, I thought to myself, you know, we haven't necessarily been calling it this in the nuclear industry. If you look at the nuclear safety culture traits, I think that we are referring to it when we talk about an environment for raising concerns. And we refer to it also when we talk about a questioning attitude. So it is good to see that there are healthy levels of psychological safety in the participants that are part of this webinar today. I can also see that there are there is room for improvement, and that we can strengthen the level of psychological safety. Now, psychological safety, a leader's behavior will have a huge impact. A leader's behavior is the 20% that will have 80% impact on organizational culture. That is true. However, psychological safety, the level of psychological safety that we feel, is not only dependent on the actions of one person in the management role. Psychological safety needs to be co-created by members of the team. So you speaking up, you asking questions, you voicing your ideas and your concerns has a huge impact on the level of psychological safety. It encourages others to do the same. So please continue to risk being vulnerable. And you know, the other side of vulnerability is courage. It takes courage to speak up and voice a thought or ask a question when you're the only one in the room. But it may make a difference. Your speaking up may make a difference to the safety and the security of the organization that you're part of. Thank you, Carl. Paul, can we move to the next slide, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Apologies, just here we go. Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so when we feel a sense of safety, we do our best thinking. Nancy Klein from Oxford, who's done amazing work in this area, and you know, a lot of her work is also based on empirical research. Her research revealed that not qualifications, not experience, not our background, not our level of education influences our ability to do our best thinking. The single biggest factor influencing our ability to do our best thinking is how others respond to us and how others treat us when we are doing our thinking. And if we find ourselves in a psychologically safe place where people really listen to us with the intent to understand, where they listen without judgment, where they are curious about what we say, we will do our best thinking. And when we feel safe, we are more willing to speak up and voice our concerns. And as somebody rightly pointed out in one of the previous polls, we are more willing to work collaboratively with others. Next slide, please. So I know I may be really emphasizing this too much. So before I move on to leadership behaviors, just one more thought. When we fail to speak up and voice our concerns or questions, we place the physical safety and security of our employees at risk, which may lead to a safety event, a security breach, or even the tragic loss of life. So psychological safety, which creates these conditions for people to speak up, is absolutely critical, and it's at the core of a robust and resilient safety and security culture. On to the next slide, please, Carl. Okay, so I would like us to pause now and think about those leadership behaviors that create a safe space for us to question, contribute to our ideas, etc. And before I give you my insights, I'm not going to ask you to complete the poll, but I just want you to reflect. Reflect on your own experience. Think about those leaders whose behavior encouraged you to speak up. Leaders whose behaviors helped you to do your best thinking. Leaders whose behaviors encouraged you to take more ownership and accountability, not only for your performance, but the performance of the team and the organization as a whole. I remember I was a graduate in training at Coburg, and my manager, Helena de Toy Laurits, just came from a meeting, a senior management meeting. And she said to me, "Oh, I am so relieved that that went well. I was so nervous before going in." And I thought, wow, my manager feels nervous and she's telling me that she felt this anxiety before going into a senior meeting. So it's actually okay. And it's okay for me to talk about it as well. So that behavior that Helena demonstrated when I was 23 years old had a huge impact on my sense of safety. So let's explore some of these behaviors in a little bit more detail. Thank you, Carl. So Helena and other effective behaviors or other effective leaders that have demonstrated behaviors that have had a huge positive impact on creating an environment of trust, open communication and accountability can be captured in what we describe as collaborative and inclusive leadership. So collaborative leaders, they create an environment in which all are inspired and empowered to contribute fully to achieving collective goals. They create the conditions in which others can find their voice and they express it. And they have the ability to access the collective wisdom of people around them. They deeply understand that each person has a piece of the puzzle, and it's in the mix of diverse perspectives that innovative thinking emerges. One of you, when I asked you to describe the behaviors of a robust and resilient safety culture, you mentioned innovative thinking. And collaborative leadership has the power to facilitate collaborative thinking. Again, at a more pragmatic level, let's get more practical insight into what those behaviors actually look like and sound like. Next slide, please. So the leadership behaviors that I'm highlighting here have a huge impact on creating a foundation of trust and a foundation of accountability. To get everybody to pull in the same direction, leaders need to create a shared purpose and collective goals and involve their employees in co-creating that. When employees are engaged in that process, they will have a stronger emotional commitment to those goals, and they will tend to take more ownership and accountability. When we are delegating tasks, or it may be at the start of the shift brief, and we're talking about the work and the task for the day, provide the context, frame the work. What is this work that we are doing? What are the potential risks? How is this task connected to other tasks? And why is this task so important? If we want people to work together collaboratively, And to demonstrate the behaviors that we want to see, then we need to define what those values are and what those behaviors are. So a very important practice is setting and communicating clear behavioral expectations. So if you think about where your organization is at now in terms of its cycle of performance, and you think about the step change in terms of performance improvement, what are those behaviors that will help you to bring about the biggest positive shift? What will it look like? What will we hear people saying and doing? So set very clear behavioral expectations. Next slide, please, Carl. As a parent, I've got 2 teenagers. They're in the teenage years now. And this is not only applicable to when they were small, but even now as almost adults. I know that what will influence and impact them the most is the behavior that they see me demonstrating. That's the same in an organization as well. So yes, we want managers or leaders to set and communicate clear behavioral expectations. Very important is modeling the behaviors that we want others to demonstrate. If we want to create a culture of open communication, then we need to establish trust-based relationships. And relationships where we get to know others' needs, their wants, and expectations. It's only when Eliana spoke to me about her anxiety that I was encouraged to talk to her about my levels of insecurity and anxiety. So demonstrate vulnerability and humility. Say that you don't know all there is to know. Ask for feedback. Offer help and support. Thank you, Carl. Now, this one is also huge. So, you know, conversations happen in meetings. Conversations happen in one-to-one sessions, in daily screening meetings or safety review boards, etc. Conversations happen informally as well. So how do you, as a manager or leader, help people to express their voice? Leaders need to be skilled at facilitating open dialogue. And one of the important practices of facilitating open dialogue is by asking very good or skillful open-ended questions. What are your thoughts about? What do you think would be the best way to go about? Give people permission and license them to talk about problems or concerns. You may say to people, I want everybody to put on their metaphorical red hat and think of all the reasons why this could go wrong. Think of all the potential pitfalls that we may be facing. And when somebody voices a controversial idea or talks about problems or concerns, respond with curiosity. Listen actively. That will encourage them to talk even more. Very important from a practice point of view is to set up those communication structures and processes to facilitate that open dialogue. So have a look at your processes that are part of your integrated management system. Are they creating spaces for communication to happen with the right people at the right time? On to the next one, please, Cole. So underlying these behaviors are what I would call a way of being. So collaborative and inclusive leaders have got 3 traits in common: humility, curiosity, and vulnerability. Next slide, please, Carl. What I would like to just end off with in terms of this presentation is just some of the additional key enablers that will make it easier for the right behavior to show up. And they are summed up in the next slide. Thank you, Carl. There should be a diagram coming up. Okay. So we've spoken about one of the key enablers, set and communicate clear behavioral expectations. We've spoken about the importance of modeling behavior. The third key enabler is around coaching, training, and developing our employees, developing their capacity to be able to demonstrate the behaviors that we want to see. We may set behavioral expectations. Not everybody will be able to immediately start living that or demonstrating that. They may need coaching. They may need feedback to find out about their blind spots. They may need development. Some organizations have included training around emotional intelligence, how to have skillful conversations, how to have crucial conversations. The next key enabler is positive reinforcement. Now, in our industry, we are geared to identify shortfalls, pitfalls, weaknesses, or what is commonly known as areas for improvement, AFIs. Positive reinforcement is about recognizing what is going right, recognizing those behaviors that you want to see, and giving positive feedback so that you're encouraging that person to continue to demonstrate the right behavior. Positive reinforcement is also about storytelling and giving people examples that make it explicit about how that behavior is linked to that result. I'll give you an example of positive reinforcement as well. So I was presenting a workshop on, I think it was the 3rd floor or 4th floor. And as a facilitator, I had my huge facilitator kit with me, and I was waiting in front of the lift. And next to the lift was a staircase. And I saw written on each step was the number of calories that I would use as I climbed each step. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take the steps instead. So by making that change, just by painting and clarifying the positive consequence for me by walking the staircase, it encouraged me to use the stairs instead. And I did lose a few calories. So positive reinforcement is any action or activity that will continue to encourage the behavior that you want to see. And lastly, it's about embedding it and integrating those behaviors into our daily activities and practices, making sure that there's synergy between our management system and the behaviors that we want to see. Thank you, Carl. On to the next slide. So I'd really just like to end off, I think, with this very powerful poem from Paul, who's the head of industry at Google. In developing a robust and resilient culture and bringing about a shift in culture, and we said culture is what people say and do and think and feel. Speaking human to human, it will really help us to make a positive shift and help us to create a psychologically safe space for people to do their best thinking and voice their concerns and generate those ideas that will help us to identify performance improvements that will strengthen our safety and security culture. So I will end off there. My apologies for running a little bit over time. And that's my area for improvement, is my time management. So if we can use the last 5 minutes just to hear if there are any questions or any comments that you have that you would like to share. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Wendy. Some really powerful thoughts there. So ladies and gentlemen, please use the Q&A button at the bottom. I see we have a couple already, but just while those come in, and hopefully won't take too long. Thank you, Wendy, again. I guess from my own perspective, and I'll use the chair's prerogative here, as a fairly, I'm going to say, cynical Brit, I hear words like passionate and engagement, and I'm kind of automatically suspicious. But I suspect a couple of other people are as well. But in your experience, are there cultural differences which impact interpretation of engagement, or which would sort of, how does culture, and I mean national culture or sort of like local culture, impact this sense of engagement?
Thank you, Carl. That's a very good and very important question. So national culture, firstly, will definitely influence organizational culture, and our national culture will influence how we express behavior and how especially we express emotions like passion. So as I said, you know, I'm South African, and I may be a more extroverted personality. And with extroverted personalities, emotions are more visible through body language and facial expressions. In another culture, so let's take you, Carl. You may feel the same level of passion that I feel, but you may not necessarily express that verbally in what you're saying and say, yay, Wendy, that is so important, or this is what I feel we should do. And I may not see that in your body language, but you may be feeling it, because in your culture, enthusiasm and excitement is expressed differently. So we've also got to be very careful about making interpretations around what we see and what we don't see. We need to get to understand not just the culture that we're operating in, but also the individual within that culture as well, because there are also personality differences that will influence how people express their emotions and also what they say as well.
Thank you, Wendy. And I think that leads quite nicely into Richard's question in the chat there, in the Q&A there. For those of you unable to see the Q&A button, I'll just read it out, but Wendy, it's there. But what advice do you have for approaching improving culture in a vast and diverse work team, with individuals coming from different countries, life experiences, and social backgrounds?
Yeah. So very important again. So if we think about from a nuclear safety and security culture perspective, okay, those safety traits are there and they are universal. But what that safety or security culture trait or that value will look like behaviorally will be different in different contexts. So I think within the context of a multinational and multicultural work environment, it's about getting people together in the same room and talking about what this looks like behaviorally when expressed in my culture, and then getting an agreement around what will this look like behaviorally when we express this in our organizational context. So for example, the UAE has got a very, very diverse organizational culture. I can't remember the number of different nationalities, 60 or 70 something. And they've developed what they call the Nawa language. And that was co-created, which is now common, the common language for all those people. So get people involved, have the conversation, clarify what good will look like, and also talk about what are some of the shifts that may be more difficult for me to make because of my cultural background as well. I hope that answers the question, albeit in a very brief way. There's a lot more to say about that, and hopefully I can get into more of that detail at part 2 as well.
Thanks, Wendy. I know we're coming up for time, so just two last comments. But thank you so much for that question, Richard, and for the message in the chat as well. A question from George. Do you think an executive, excuse me, do you think an effective security culture can grow organically without active leadership from the corporate suite?
Can it grow organically? Yeah. So some people will describe culture as having an emergent property. Okay, so culture can grow organically when all the important facets are in place. One of the crucial facets is leadership behavior. So the fish rots from the head. And we use that, to describe the powerful impact that leadership behavior has on organizational culture. So let's say, for example, your policies, let's say you capture, because we capture culture also in policies and in procedures, right? You may capture culture in policies or procedures. And that is important, definitely in our context. It's critical in the nuclear industry. However, if a manager's behavior is contradictory and is different to what is in that policy or that process or the procedure, that leader's behavior will have the biggest impact in influencing the behavior of the rest of the organization.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wendy. And I know we're just a little bit over, so I'll draw the questions to an end there. Just to say thank you so much, everyone. And just a quick comment from Mark in the Q&A there. He's been working in HRO for 40 years and just says, Wendy's completely nailed it. We talk the security industry talk, but seldom take the points raised, so bravo. Small compliment there. So thank you, Mark. That's great to hear.
Thank you, Mark. Much appreciated.
Excellent. So Wendy, thank you so much for your time. It's great to draw on that. I'm really looking forward to part 2, which we'll advertise shortly.